Gouging Fire, the past paradox form of Entei, has just been banned from Generation 9 OU with an unbelievable 91.14% ban vote percentage. That is an insane supermajority and the most sweeping result since the Blood Moon Ursaluna suspect vote. How did we get here, folks? Gouging Fire has been suspected twice now. The first one had a different result. Gouging Fire was tested, voted on, and not banned. They thought he was fine. So why was he tested again, and why is the result so different this time, so significantly different? Let's take a look, folks. Ever since the release of DLC 2, Gouging Fire has been a dominant and popular choice in Gen 9 OU, and it's easy to see why. A fire dragon typing is pretty nice for a dragon dance sweeper. It is immune to burn, which is one of the most common ways to counteract dragon dance users. It has great stats, well balanced all around with great bulk and offensive stats. Nothing crazy in the attack department, 115 base attack, but that is definitely good enough to pose a significant threat. And Gouging Fire is also a premier terastallization abuser. Terastallization has been abused in competitive singles by various dragon dance sweepers, and Gouging Fire is one of the most effective at this. A set that was causing a lot of problems in the earlier metagame was the bulky dragon dance set with Breaking Swipe. Breaking Swipe is a 60 power dragon type attack that has a 100% chance to lower the enemy's attack stat. So Gouging Fire could boost itself up, heal up with Morning Sun as well, and actually attack while nerfing the enemy's attack, making it much more difficult to take out, especially paired with terastallization to defend against incoming super effective hits. It was just really difficult to pin this Pokemon down and eliminate it. That's what got it suspect tested in the first place, early on in the first round of DLC. So Gouging Fire was on the chopping block, but eventually the community decided not to ban Gouging Fire. The vote was against banning Gouging Fire because as this suspect was going on, counterplay started to emerge to this bulky dragon dance Gouging Fire set, as bulky fairy types can answer it. Things like Unaware Clefable are pretty solid, and Terra Fairy defensive Pokemon can also not only respond to Gouging Fire, but multiple other things in the metagame, making it a pretty reasonable thing to actually check and adapt to. So the metagame responded to this, but Gouging Fire has changed a lot in how it is used since then. Over time, since people are prepared for this Breaking Swipe set, more aggressive booster energy sets were on the rise, and Gouging Fire is a Pokemon that can really take advantage of its significant diversity. I mean, with such good stats in the defensive and offensive areas, it can be difficult to tell what Gouging Fire is going to go for. A defensive Terra type with leftovers, Morning Sun, and Breaking Swipe is one way to go, but you can also just go full on aggressive with booster energy, Dragon Dance, sometimes even Sun teams abuse Gouging Fire, and as is the case for many Pokemon that have been banned in Gen 9 OU competitive singles, Gouging Fire is a Pokemon that is really hard to predict what Terra type it is going to use, and the Terra type is very significant on this Pokemon because it determines what it beats and what it doesn't. It is pretty difficult to beat a Pokemon that can abuse so many different Terra types and pick and choose its own checks and counters. So responding to Gouging Fire is kind of a problem. I mean, we started to see Terra Poison as a response to the Fairy Terras and the Fairy Pokemon trying to answer Gouging Fire. Zamazenta is a common check to Gouging Fire because it comes in with the defense boost. It's very bulky, but Gouging Fire started to run Terra Blast Fairy as coverage for this, and it's also useful against other Pokemon like the various Dark types and Dragon types in the metagame. On top of being good defensively, Unaware has been one of the most consistent ways to respond to boost sweepers like this in the metagame. Unaware is an ability that ignores enemy stat stage changes, so Unaware Pokemon started to rise up, but the problem is that Skeledirge, one of the most solid Unaware Pokemon in the format, cannot really get through Gouging Fire very well because it cannot burn Gouging Fire in its base typing. It is a bit awkward to deal with Gouging Fire as Skeledirge. Dondozo is very solid, but being forced to run Dondozo is a little rough, to be honest. And even then, Terra Blast, Terra Fairy Gouging Fire with booster energy can sometimes even 1v1 Dondozo because you are resisting their body press. Unaware does not ignore the attack boost from Photosynthesis that you get from the booster energy, and the extra damage on Terra Blast Fairy can actually overwhelm Dondozo. Clodsire is another Unaware Pokemon, but Clodsire is not very solid against Gouging Fire, who just has Earthquake. And then you have like Quagsire and Clefable, who are pretty good, but they also have low base stats and can get pretty easily overwhelmed just by the Photosynthesis damage. And they don't have a great way to actually respond to Gouging Fire in time. I mean, attacking into it seems okay with Earthquake, but defensive Terra thwarts that. Poisoning it might work, but Gouging Fire can overwhelm you very quickly, and in general, it just feels like there is not enough time to respond to Gouging Fire reliably, and Gouging Fire is so unpredictable that it's not clear how to respond to it exactly. Exactly. This is a common problem in Gen 9 in general, brought upon by Terra. And Terra has its advantages in the metagame. Terra is really cool and dynamic. It creates interesting game states and outplay potential, but this is one of the issues that Terra has always had, is just buffing these Dragon Dance sweepers to such an extent that it is usually unhealthy. We've seen it with Baxcalibur and other snowbally boost sweepers like Annihilape and Espathra. So I think it's kind of interesting that we gave Gouging Fire a chance. We didn't ban it first, let the metagame evolve, and Gouging Fire over time has proved to be a consistent issue and put a strain on team building to the extent that most of the community that is actively playing wants to see it gone. And you can't really argue with 91% vote to ban majority. I mean, that's crazy. It's a shame to see Gouging Fire go. It is one of my favorite of the new Paradox forms. I mean, its visual design perhaps leaves something to be desired. It is Entei with a hat on. I don't know about all that, but in terms of gameplay, I kind of liked it. It's fire dragon typing. I like the typing. I like all its options, but sometimes variety can make a Pokemon OP, especially when you factor in Terra, which just makes things very, very unpredictable and difficult. If you still want to use Gouging Fire, you can probably give it a go in Ubers UU, which is a format in between OU and Ubers, where a lot of Pokemon have found a home now. Gouging Fire, probably pretty good there, I imagine. I mean, it's a solid Pokemon. And despite Gen 9 being one of the most tumultuous and divisive and difficult to balance metagames in Pokemon history, that has confused casual players beyond recognition, with all the bans happening and all the rule set changes and propositions, the Terra fiasco, which was the most divisive thing I've ever seen in the Pokemon community. It really seems like no matter what decision gets made in Gen 9 OU, there is a large portion of people who are furious about it, and I hear it every time in my comments. No matter what happens, someone's furious. But all that being said, I think that at the moment, Gen 9 OU has reached a pretty balanced state. I mean, this particular suspect test was done over a long period of time. Gouging Fire was not so obviously broken, I suppose, that it got quick banned like some previous Pokemon like Chien-Pao and Chi-Yu and all them, Fluttermane, etc. So Gouging Fire had its time to exist, and I think that this has been a fair assessment of it that has resulted in a ban. And I'm glad the meta is at a point where we can take our time with these things and evaluate them fairly. That feels pretty good. As for what might happen in the future, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people seem to think Kyurem is a problem. A lot of people seem to maybe think Zamazenta is. I like Zamazenta personally. As a former Zamazenta hater, I think that I enjoy what it brings to the metagame. It feels like a pretty reliable, go-to check to physical threats, as well as an interesting Pokemon to play around with. Honestly, isn't that hard to check in my opinion. I like it. I like what it adds, but some people think it's problematic. And then there's Darkrai. I don't know if Darkrai's broken either. I think Darkrai's okay, personally speaking, and another thing that Finchinator also teased was maybe testing out Palafin again, because a lot has changed since Palafin was originally banned. There was way less Pokemon in the game. Palafin was way more dominant in that metagame back then. Now Palafin might be okay. So that actually could be an interesting retest, and I think that has been in talks. I don't know if it will happen for sure, but they have considered it. I personally would like to see it. I mean, worst case scenario, you just ban him again, but why not test him out? It's worth it, I think, in such a different metagame, and maybe we might see more retests now that things are stable and we have the time to do so. Why not introduce some variety, spice things up, bring back some forgotten faces, and see if it works out? I think that it's a promising future for Gen 9 OU. Despite being a frustrating metagame to play for a long time, it's stabilizing in an interesting way, I would say, and I am looking forward to the future to see what happens. Thanks for watching, folks. What do you think of this ban, and do you disagree or agree? And what do you think should happen in terms of future action in Gen 9 OU? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.